Welcome everyone. What joyous words that psalm is. And I'll share with you, last week I worshipped at Roseville Church in country Queensland, and it was the blessing of the animals getting ready a little bit early for the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. And the Bible reading was in fact the psalm that the song by the Rivers of Babylon, sung by Boney M, that is referenced in the pew sheet, was based on. And my godson and I had a hard time not to start singing and dancing in this little wooden church surrounded by some really massive dogs, including huskies, that sat there for the full 2-hour service and only shed quite a bit of hair in the church. And that reminded me just how powerful the psalms and songs are in our lives. And the start of today's psalm, I just thought was so joyous, and it gives me a real sense of being connected to God and God being around us in the world. Now, Psalm 19 is one of many, many psalms, around 80 actually, maybe a bit more, that was written by King David. And we know that because you'll notice at the start of it, does it say that in this one? It does. It starts off, for the director of music, a psalm of David. Now those words, my research tells me, were actually included on the original copies of the documents when they went into the Bible. So the Psalms that we have them today, they're a collection of songs that were used in worship at the time they were written. They were written over hundreds of years, mostly by King David, and some of them by his son, Solomon, who wrote the really marvellous Song of Solomon that is often read out at weddings. And in case you were wondering, and I did check this because I wanted to know, yes, King David is indeed the David that slew Goliath. So we've met David before, and he has written most of these Psalms, and the Psalms is the third longest book in the Bible and has the most authors at about 7. I find these things intriguing. There are actually people who have listed the books of the Bible by author, by number of authors and length, in words. But this is only a fraction. The Psalms that we have today is only a mere fraction of the hymns and songs that were written at the time and that were used. And they're a bit unusual because if you listen to today's psalm, you've got an entire church service right there. We start off with the praising and the celebrating of God. Then we move into a quick lesson on God's law and the importance of it and the perfection of it. And then we come to a prayer that I started off saying is reminiscent of the Lord's Prayer, but then I realised that's the other way around. That we're praying for forgiveness of sins and to be delivered from sins at the end of this psalm. And that is really the Lord's Prayer that we say together, that God said, or Jesus said at the Last Supper, contains a very similar set of words. And the words that the psalm ends with, that really, I think anybody of our age, they're real toe tappers, but probably not for all the right reasons. And that's, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, are actually the closing words of the main daily prayer that was said in Jerusalem. So those words would have had a very, very powerful place in the lives of the people at the time and in Jewish tradition. So whenever those words were said, and using those words to close the psalm, as they were used to close the psalm that was in the readings last week, you'd be really harking back to a very strong religious tradition that people would have been familiar with. And it's the offering up of the prayer that you've just said to the Lord's for the Lord's mercy and blessing and consideration. And I think for me that it's quite a beautiful little prayer in its own right for use in daily life. And so I thought we'll close the sermon at the end praying that one together, because I think it's a beautiful, beautiful set of words. Now the Psalms, so as you can see, the Psalm here, it's really, they say it's a bit of a confronting thing, because it's not just a song and it's not just a prayer, it's all mixed in together. And so that was as unusual, it was apparently very unusual then, and it was also unusual that it was poetry, because the poetry before then had apparently been quite licentious and a bit confronting and not quite socially acceptable often. And so when we've written the Psalms, they've gone straight for poetry, they're mixing in prayers, they're mixing in teaching, they're mixing in the glorification of God. The psalm of last week was a psalm of pleading and great distress, remembering people who have been brought into a strange land and how can they worship their God. This psalm starts with the great glorification of God's majesty, and we're looking at the skies that are calling out his majesty. And what they do is they're this big outpouring of emotion. To me, I just feel that there's this explosion of emotion at the start of this piece that comes and connects directly with my heart, so I can relate to them. And that's what I think makes them so beautiful. And a lot of the Bible commentaries say, look, don't analyse these words for word. Look for the central idea that they're trying to talk about and really feel it. Because to me, when I looked at this psalm, I was looking at the readings, and we've had the most beautiful weather recently. And I've travelled to a couple of places that bring me a great deal of peace. And this psalm really, really spoke to me. One of the Bible commentaries describes the Psalms as Israel's words of response to her God. How beautiful is that? I nearly cried when I was reading that. So we start off with, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. That's really romantic if you think that when you're sitting there and you look up to the night sky, and I think we all know that a night sky is very special. There's a long history. You go and you look at the night sky, people navigate by the night sky, but you know that there's something special. And I just think, wow, imagine that not only is that night sky there, it's wanting to tell us things, that we're in a world where God is communicating to us through the world is communicating to us about God, and we just need to be prepared to open it up and listen. So I've brought along some photos. Now these are mainly photos of my husband, because he does a good photo. And so I thought, well, when the heavens are declaring the glory of God, now who does not rush out for a great sunset? I think we all do. So this sunset is a sunset from Darwin, where my brother lives, which is pretty amazing. So we're looking out there over the sea out to, I think, Papua New Guinea is far in the distance. Can we have the next one? This sunset is at Shoal Bay, where I go to speak every year, but it's a lovely gift of a family weekend, but it's an amazing sunset. The next one? Oh, this is actually, I think, a sunrise at Marburg, which is out in country New South Wales. And so this is where I think you look at the landscape and you can soften into it and see what a beautiful, beautiful landscape there is. The next one. Oh, now this is I think this is another sunset at Shoal Bay, which is pretty amazing. And the next one. Oh, this is one of my favourite views. So this view is also from my friend's place at Marburg. And I often go there when I've had a real... for rest and serenity after living a pretty hectic life in the centre of the city. And I think we all know that life in the city is a busy one with lots of people and lots of cars. And we'll leave that one up at the moment. So, we'll do the next one as well, sorry, because from peace and serenity, we get this, which is Mount Cook in New Zealand. And so all these places, I think they're typical that I'm experiencing the same feelings around these places that a lot of people do. We stop for views, we look out of them, we see sunsets, and we just go, wow! And then we go to a mountain range, and that's massive nature. And you think that all around us, these are all places where you'll stop and you'll think. You often sit and contemplate because you're out, you're looking there, and I know that in each of these places I've felt a sense of very, very deep peace, where I've been able to leave the worries of whatever's with me behind, that I can think, I can meditate. It's very, very helpful because you're out there in this beautiful place. And I find that very difficult in my everyday life. It's one of my challenges. I keep going, and when do I ever reflect? And then yesterday though, I had a little bit of an epiphany after when I started writing this sermon, because I often start and then I think for quite a few days. And I realised I was watering my garden, and I've got for the first time ever in my life, I've got some fruit trees. I've got a lemon tree that gives a whole lot of lemons. I've got a fig tree that produced a fig once and then Lily pulled it off, and so we're really hoping this year we'll get a fig again because I love figs. And then we've got a tree that we don't know what it is. I'm hoping it might be a lime tree. And so anyway, I Googled, and Google told me I needed to give them a deep watering once a week. So that's what I do. I was so excited. I've wanted fruit trees my entire life. So I'm watering my trees, and I noticed there's blossom all over them. And the sun was warm, and I was standing in the nice warm sun, not too warm, and I could see the blossoms, and I could smell the perfume of I could smell the perfume of the lemon blossom, and I could see a lemon that was going. It's still green. And in that moment, could we actually have the next slide? Oh, no, he didn't put the last slide on. Okay, oh no. Oh, well, the next one was just a photo of my lemon tree with the lemon blossom and the lemon. And I felt so satisfied that my lemon tree had, I'd looked after it well enough that it was going to produce a lemon, that it was covered in blossom, the sun was warm, and I could smell this beautiful perfume. And then I realised that we don't need to actually go away out into big nature or travel out, that even in the city there is a place where you can, if you look, you can be connected with the marvel and wonder of God. Because there I was in my garden, and I have a tree that's going to provide lemons for me and enough for my friends. You'll probably see them in church because we don't use as much lemons as this little scraggy tree produces. I had another experience like this. I went one Saturday, I think, and I'd been really, really, really stressed at work. And I went to have a cup of tea with a friend. Now, she lives right in the inner city and has a paved backyard, and there's fences on either side, and it's one of those terrace houses. And we got our cup of tea. We went to sit on a bench together in the backyard. And we sat on the bench, we looked up at a tree, we looked out at the sky, and the sky was perfectly blue, the tree was green, the air was warm, and I had my cup of tea, sitting next to a friend. No words were necessary. And in that time, in the centre of the city, the world stopped. And I felt perfectly serene, perfectly connected to the world, and at one with myself. And that was such a great gift. We didn't need to talk, and when I left, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted from me, and I'd been given that time out of myself, out of my life, even in the middle of a big city. And I thanked God for that time, because it was what I really needed right then. So there's the wonder in the big things and the majesty of the big mountains and the glorious skies that are pouring forth words talking to us of God's majesty. And there's the little bits of tiny creation that are going on every day right in front of us. Now, one of the Bible commentators that I was reading mentioned that his view on it was that nature and all of that around us is put there as the physical manifestation of God, so that we can better and more perfectly understand him. And I really liked that, because we hear that, God created the world, there's the creation story, and he created the world, he brought forth life. Yet we can see that every time a flower opens. We can see it if we see a butterfly. We can see it on my fruit tree. Gosh, I love my fruit tree, just in case you hadn't gotten that. And we don't need the big nature, but all of that is there to show us that he is here. And so from this is what fits really nicely into our recycling initiative today. Because if God has placed the world here so that we can better understand him, and the world is calling forth his majesty and telling us about him and communicating with us, and we're listening, it puts an onus on us to look after that world and to treat it right. So I think it fits in nicely with something that a few of us had been talking about anyway, where we recycle and we look to do no harm to the world as well. And with a few little things such as this, we can start making a big difference. So I want to finish with the prayer. If everybody's got Psalm 19 open, and I've shut mine. There you go. So the last verse, if we can pray together. May these words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord. You are my rock and my redeemer. Amen.